All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you had enough time to grab some lunch, some food, drinks. Today, we're going to talk about how to troubleshoot recursive triggers on the Salesforce platform. My name is Jean-Philippe Monette. I am a technical architect working for a company called Mavens. I've been doing Salesforce development, Salesforce development for the past 5 years. It's my first time speaking at Dreamforce, and of course, I had to catch a cold just to make it better and easier. So, if you're a developer, an architect, Salesforce administrator, I think this might be relevant for you. So, if you guys want to stick around, that would be probably good for you. So, just before we go forward, just a quick note that when considering future developments, you should always base your purchasing decisions on what is currently available. I should not talk about anything from the future, but in case, just don't make purchasing decisions based on that. So let's dive right in. Our game plan for today is going to be quite simple. First off, I'll do a quick introduction about the context, so to learn the lingo that we're going to use today. Then I will dive you through two scenarios where you can have recursive triggers. The first one will be a spouse situation, so it will be related to the contact object. And the second one will be declarative side effects, so how can declarative functionalities can have an impact on your Salesforce triggers. This has been already implemented in an existing Salesforce instance, so I will show you the current state of that. Our fourth point will be lessons learned during the session. Fifth point, next steps. So how can you be proactive and learn more about it? And then Q&A if you guys have any questions. So first thing, what are Apex triggers? So Apex triggers, they enable you to perform custom actions on the platform. So you can execute actions before and after changes to various Salesforce records, such as for a specific event. So if you do insertions, updates, deletions, you can automate actions. So a good example would be if you want that whenever a salesperson is closing an opportunity because they successfully closed the deal, you may want to generate an invoice automatically or synchronize with an accounting system. So this is where Apex triggers could help you automate that. On the other side, what is a recursive trigger? A recursive trigger is one calling itself multiple times in the same transaction. So one scenario where you could use recursive triggers is, let's say you want to roll up data up a hierarchy of accounts. So let's say you have multiple levels of accounts, and you want to roll up from the child to another child to the master account. This is where you may want some recursive triggers to be happening, so that the data is update on a higher level of accounts. However, this presentation will talk about recursive triggers that are happening for unexpected reasons. And sometimes it's hard to see that you have triggers that are happening and being recursive, but in other scenarios, you may end up with users telling you, hey, JP, I'm trying to save a record in my Salesforce instance, but I'm getting a very nice error message like that, and I cannot go forward. So we'll have a look at that. So our first scenario will be spouse situation. So we've implemented some logic around the contact object. It's very, very simple business logic. So whenever contact record is associated to its spouse inside the database using a lookup field, we want the system to create the reciprocal relationship on the spouse record. So this has been implemented in a Salesforce trigger. And just to explain you a bit more how it works, or just give you a scenario, let's say we create a contact called John Doe, and then we want to create a spouse called Jane Doe. But we want both of these records to be associated to each other. Well, in our contact object, we've created a lookup field called spouse. So when I create Jane Doe, I want to say, okay, Jane Doe's spouse is John Doe. Well, when I save that record to the database, I want that automatically on John Doe's, we want to have the reciprocal relationship populated in his spouse lookup. So in this scenario, the symptoms that we have recursivity going on is that there is a DML exception or an error that is displayed on the user interface, like I showed in the previous slide, that is preventing the user from going forward. So it's preventing the user altogether from creating new records or updating new records. So let's troubleshoot. So I'll go in our Salesforce instance here, the contact tab. I will try to create John Doe. So John Doe. We have our spouse lookup. Interesting. I have to close that. Thank you. So yeah, I click on contact tab, new. I'll just go back just in case you guys missed it. I click new here. First name, so I'll say it's John. Last name is Doe. And we have our spouse lookup field, which is, it allows you to link records together. I'll leave it empty for now because Jane Doe's record doesn't exist yet. So I'll click Save and New. And I will try to create Jane Doe. And she is related to John. Now I'll try to save the record. Awesome. Exactly what I want. Error message. So now I cannot go forward. I cannot save my record to the database because there is that trigger in the background that it's trying to link both records together. So what I'll do here to show you what's going on, I will use a tool called the Developer Console that is available out of the box with Salesforce, which is basically allowing you to debug your code, see Apex logs, and do other various things. So in order to be able to debug that transaction, I will try to save the record again so that in the Developer Console, you can set the bottom. There is the log pane that gives you every single logs of every transaction that just happened for my active user. So I open that individual Apex log. Here you can see a lot of stuff going on. But we will try to focus on the lower part here, which is the execution overview. And this is where you can see if you had some workflow rules that have been executed, Apex triggers, assignment rules, and things like that. So in that case here, I try to insert Jane Doe. So you can see at the very top here, contact insert. And we have our trigger called contact trigger that has been executed. And it seems that following that, it tried to update another record just at the row below it, which is probably John Doe. And then it executed contact trigger a second time. And then it executed a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time. And then it executed a lot of times until we reach a point where, okay, the platform is telling us we cannot go further because this is never ending. So what is going on? Why is this trigger being executed recursively? I will go back to the presentation. There you go. Awesome. So the first thing I would recommend you guys to do is to do process mapping. So have a clear understanding of what is supposed to happen. So our expected behavior is, okay, I create a contact, or in this case, I'll update it. I insert my contact Jane Doe. First, our trigger, nope. First, we're checking if Jane Doe has a spouse. If Jane Doe doesn't have a spouse in the lookup field, we just want to exit the trigger. However, if there's a spouse, we want to reciprocate the relationship. So let's have a look at the code and see how this logic has been implemented. So we have here our contact trigger on the contact object that is executed every time we insert or every time we update our record. So the first thing we're doing is we're first initializing a list of contacts to update called spouses. So the second thing, we are going to iterate through the inserted or updated contact records since we want our triggers to be bulkified. And that's another topic, but this trigger is bulkified. So in this case, we insert Jane Doe, and then we start iterating through all the records that are being updated in this transaction. In this case, it's only one record, which is Jane Doe. So the first thing we do in that loop, we check if Jane Doe has our spouse lookup populated using string is not blank. And if the value is not populated, then we just go through the next record. In our case, since Jane Doe is with John Doe, we will execute that if statement. So the first thing we do, we instantiate a spouse using the contact class here on the line 16. Then I will set the record ID to John Doe's ID using Jane Doe's record that we have while iterating in this loop. Then I'll try to populate the spouse lookup field of John Doe's with Jane Doe's ID that is being inserted. And then I'll add this contact to our spouse list so that after we iterate through all the records that are being updated or inserted, I'll be able to update that. So I'll be able to replicate the relationship on John Doe's record. And then at the very end, line 27, I will try to update the records, so John Doe's record. And it seems that the line 27 is the one where we're having an issue because it's being executed over and over again. So let's go back in the presentation and see what seems to be the actual behavior. So we have the exact same logic. So we are doing the same thing as on the expected side. However, because of that DML statement, since the trigger is tied to the same Salesforce object, so in this case on the contact object, it makes it very easy to easily invoke the same logic multiple times, because when I try to update John Doe's record to replicate the relationship, then it will go again through the logic here. Does John Doe has a spouse? Yes, because I've just updated John Doe's record. So I'll try to update Jane Doe's record, and then I'll try to update John Doe's, and Jane Doe and John Doe, and it will never stop. So this is where we're having an issue. So how can we fix that? Let's go back in the code and see what is possible. So go back in Sublime Text here. The first thing I would recommend you guys to do is to make sure that you don't put your logic in triggers and leave it in Apex classes outside your trigger. And there's two good reasons for that. The first one, it makes your code easier to reuse. So if there's some, let's say this logic, we're using it inside a trigger, but maybe I would like to execute this kind of relationship logic somewhere else in the system. Well, right now, since it's in the trigger, I cannot reuse it. So I will comment that out. And I already have an Apex class called contact trigger handler with a static method called handle, where I am sending the trigger context. So I can use the list of updated contact in my class. I will save that to Salesforce. Here we have the Apex class called context trigger. We have our static method here called handle with the exact same logic. So the first thing, the second thing that is good about Apex class when you build your trigger is that you can use static variables. And static variables are extremely helpful because they allow you to track state during the whole transaction. So in this case, what we would like to track is to see if this piece of logic is currently being executed or not. So when I'm trying to update John Doe's record, I don't want that if John Doe's record spouse lookup is being populated to re-update Jane Doe's, because I mean it would just like go recursively. So in this case, I've created an attribute called isRunning, which is a Boolean that will track the state of if the method is being executed or not. The default value will be set to false because, well, whenever the trigger is starting, we know that this piece of logic is not being executed. The second thing that we want to do is to make sure that before we execute the logic in that method, we want to check that if this logic is currently being executed or if it's currently running. And the way to do so is just before we start, we check with an if statement if is running Boolean is equal to true. And if it is, we want to just do a return. So we'll leave this method. Now we know that it would exit the method if it's true. But we want to make sure that we set the Boolean to true as well. So the perfect way to put that, to set the Boolean to true, is just before our update statement. Because since the static variables, their value are preserved in the whole transaction, we want to make sure that just before we update the John Doe's record, we want to make sure that we set it to true to say, OK, I'm currently updating John Doe's record, so don't re-execute that contact trigger. So I'll put is running equals to true. And just after we update our spouses, we want a set is running to false. So let's say in the same transaction, if you decide to update or insert a contact record with a spouse and then do another request in the same transaction where you would like to, again, insert or update contact with, again, some spouse, we want the logic to be executed as well the second time, but not to be recursive. So I'll save our updated Apex class. Yep, just ignore that part. Then let's go back to Salesforce. Now let's try to save our record by clicking on Save. Awesome. I was able to insert Jane Doe in the database. We can see on the right side we have spouse John Doe. And let's see if the trigger was able to reciprocate the relationship on John Doe's record. And we can see here on the right side the spouse of John Doe is Jane Doe. So it works successfully. And just we can also look at our new Apex log for the second transaction that was successful. And we can see in the execution overview that we first insert the contact trigger was executed. We've updated John Doe's record in our second row, and it was executed only once, and that's because we've tracked the states of the transaction. So let's go back in the presentation for the second scenario. Our second scenario will talk about declarative side effects. So we've implemented some more logic, but not on the contact record, but on the lead record this time. So there's two chunks of logic that have been implemented. The first one is in an Apex trigger. So whenever a lead record is being updated in the database, we want that the custom field name number of updates, which is number field, we want this field to be incremented by 1 to keep track of lead activity. And this piece of logic has been implemented in a trigger called update count trigger. So just to explain a bit more, let's say I insert a lead, and I want to make sure that every time we change contact details, let's say I did a typo in the name, I want to increment that number of updates by 1. If we change the business information, I want to increment by 1. That field, and also if we change the number of employees, I want to increment that number by 1. The reason why is just to know that if there's a lead record that's being more active than another one, so maybe there's more chance that we'll convert that lead in the future. The second piece of logic implemented is whenever the standard field number of employees on the lead object is changed, we want that the custom field called company size, we want this field to be automatically populated. And this has been implemented using 3 workflow rules and 3 field updates. And the way it works is that, let's say we set a number of employees of 0 to 49, we want the company size to be set to small. If it's set between 50 and 245, we want it to be set to medium. And if we do 250 and above, we want the company size to be set to large. In this scenario, there's no error message going on. However, we've noticed, or actually a user noticed, that the number of update is not being incremented properly. And in certain situation, it's incremented by 1, and in other scenarios, it's being incremented by 2. And more specifically, when the company size field is being modified by workflow field updates. So again, let's go in our Salesforce instance and see what's going on. Close that. Awesome. Yep. Okay. Let's close these logs. Let's go into lead tab. I'll try to create a simple lead called John Doe again, because I don't have any imagination. So, walking for Walmart. Walmart. There you go. So we have here at the bottom number of update field, which is 0 at the moment, and the number of employees. I'll leave it empty for now. And also the company size field, which is updated by workflow field updates. So as expected, right now we just insert records, so there has been no updates. But if I decide to change the company name from Walmart to Mavens, it would increment the number of updates by 1. So that is the expected behavior. And if I change it back to Walmart, incremented by 1 as well. However, when it seems to be a problem is when the company size is changing. And this is changing or being populated when I set a number of employees. So let's try to put 30 here. So click Save. So you can see company size has been changed from empty to small, and the number of updates has been incremented by 2 instead of 1. So let's try to change again number of employees from 30 to, let's say, 40. So it should stay a small company. Our number of updates incremented by 1. Now let's try to change our company size from small to medium by putting a value between 50 and 245. So I'll put 60. We should see the number of updates change from 5 to 7. All right. So what is going on? Let's look at the developer console again. And we'll look at our 2 latest logs. So this one was when I changed from small to small. So the company size didn't change. And the second one, the one at the top here, is when I changed from small to medium our company size. So let's go again in the execution overview pane. We did our lead update. So I changed from 30 to 40 our number of employees. So we can see here the first thing that has been executed is our trigger called update count trigger. Assignment rules as well has been executed. But in that case, we don't have any assignment rules, so it's just empty. And at the very end, we can see workflows. So we can see that we have 3 workflow rules. The first one called number of employees is small. Third one is same thing but medium. And the third one is large. So the only workflow rule that has been evaluated to true is the one where number of employees is small. So everything seems to be fine. This is where I incremented by 1. In the second log, there's a tiny little difference. You can see there's a second row. Seems like the triggers has been executed a second time here at the very right side. So let's have a look at our workflow. So instead of being the first workflow rule, the small one to evaluate to true, it seems to be the medium one. And what happened at that point is that instead of repopulating the company size from small to small, it changed it to medium. And so it surprisingly re-executed that trigger. So you might wonder why workflow rules might have re-executed our triggers. Well, let's go back to our presentation. There's something very important that you need to be aware of when you're developing on the Salesforce platform, which is called the order of execution. So what is this all about? Well, the order of execution is the order of events executed whenever you're performing an insert, update, or upsert on the Force.com platform. So every time you implement assignment rules, workflow rules, validation rules, triggers, Salesforce decided of a specific order in which they will be executed. And you can see this order in the Salesforce documentation. And in our case, we won't go through all of it, but there are 2 specific lines that are relevant for that specific scenario, which is line 11 and 12. And what they say is that if there are workflow field updates, we update the record again. And if the record was updated with workflow rule field updates, we fire before update triggers and after update triggers 1 more time, and only 1 more time, in addition to standard validations. So this is why we're not getting an error message like in our previous scenario, because workflow rules will re-trigger your triggers, but only 1 time. But this is why also we are incrementing the value by 2 instead of 1, because our trigger, which is incrementing the number of update, is being executed 2 times. So this seems to be a side effect of our declarative functionalities, which are workflow rules. So again, process mapping, expected behavior was to use our trigger to increment the number of updates by 1. And then with our workflow rule, we want to check if the number of employees changed. And if it changed, we want to update the company size. But based on the order of execution, we can tell that the triggers are being executed twice. because the Salesforce platform, the way it has been engineered, they want to make sure that if there's some trigger that needs to be re-executed a second time after workflow rules, well, they're being executed a second time, which is where we're having an issue here. We are incrementing it by 2. So how can we fix this? Let's go back in our code. We have our trigger here called update count trigger, executed before update. I've already put the logic inside an Apex class called update count trigger handler. It's working exactly the same way as our previous scenario. It's very simple how it works. First thing we do is we iterate through our lead records, and then we increment the number of updates by 1. So we're going to use a similar approach as the previous scenario, but instead of tracking if the trigger is currently running, we will track the lead that has been incremented already by using the record ID. So we'll define a static variable, a static set of IDs, where we'll track every single record IDs that have been updated. Second thing, inside our loop here, we want to make sure that if we end up on a lead record that has been updated, we want to go to the next record inside our list and not increment it. So I'll do if the incremented lead IDs, if our set contains our record ID, then we want to continue, not return. Because if we return, we would leave the method and maybe leave some extra records not incremented properly. So we just want to go to the next record in our list. And then after we increment our lead record, we want to add the record ID to our list, or our set in this case. So incremented lead IDs, add record ID. So we save that. Let's go back to Salesforce. Oops, what happened there? Incremented contains, where does not use record, sorry, lead record ID. There you go. Up. Awesome. I'll go back to Chrome. Try to do the same thing. If I change from 60 to 20, workflow field updates will update company size. Before, it was incrementing the number of updates by 2, but now, since we are tracking the state, hopefully it will increment only by 1. So I'll change it to 3. So incremented by 1. So we changed the number of updates from 7 to 8 because we tracked the state of our transaction, and we know that the lead record has already been incremented. So let's go back in the presentation. So lessons learned. First thing, make sure you understand the business logic that is being implemented. So both declarative and programmatic, you can document your process and your architecture to have a good understanding of what is going on today in your system. The second thing is use static variables. They are your friends. You can use them to track state during a transaction, since the value is preserved during the whole transaction. And in order to do so in a trigger, make sure that you implement your trigger logic in Apex classes, so that, because you cannot create attributes in a trigger, but you can in an Apex class. And also make sure to do regression testing whenever you add new features, so that helps you validate that programmatic and declarative features are playing nice together. And also, you can use a developer console to assist you to troubleshoot these kind of problems. In terms of next steps, be proactive, learn more, familiarize yourself with the developer console. I know there's a lot of people who like or just dislike it. It can be hard to use sometimes, but just be aware of the main features that are available in the developer console. You can have a look in the Salesforce documentation. Also, you can learn more about the order of execution by, again, going in the Salesforce documentation. And the third thing I would recommend you is to use the trigger templates to streamline the trigger logic. And it will also allow you to put your logic in external Apex class to do static variables and a lot of things like that. So I gave 2 examples here. And if you want to get access to these links, I'll update the slides to the chatter group of the presentation. And also, I'll make the code available on GitHub. Again, you can get the link on Chatter. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you guys learned something today. And if you have any question, I'll be at the back since we are running out of time. So enjoy Dreamforce.